Hello there and welcome to another Döhle Yacht Coffee Break. My name is Ben Geary and I'm the Fleet Statutory Manager here at Döhle, and today I'm joined by Richard Hodgson from Nettitude, and we want to talk to you today about cyber security in our industry. Obviously that is a huge subject and we're only here to do a short coffee break. So there are three kind of key points that we want to try and get across today. The first is obviously the new IMO requirements that come in January 2021. Second is why are these important to our industry? And thirdly is just to get some experience of cyber threats that we're seeing on yachts. So Richard, first, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. And I'm just going to jump straight into it and ask basically what are the new requirements from the IMO?
Good afternoon. Yeah, thanks for having me on. So the Maritime Safety Committee adopted this resolution MSC.428 in June of 2017. This resolution affirms that an approved cyber safety management system should take into account cyber risk management in accordance with the objectives and functional requirements of the ISM code. And it really encourages administrations to ensure that cyber risks are appropriately addressed in safety management systems. And this has to be no later than the first annual verification of the company's dock after the 1st of January. Now, for those of you that might have read the entire IMO resolution, it can feel a bit overwhelming, especially with its vagueness. But I guess it's important to remember that the lack of a definitive approach or scope is really due to its implications, because it's trying to apply to every organisation, regardless of its size or the type of vessels it uses. But in essence, if I can just really quickly break it down, it's asking for senior management initially to embed a culture of cyber risk awareness across the organisation, so making sure that it's not just seen as an IT problem anymore. Having a risk-based approach that should be adopted with a comprehensive initial risk assessment that should be done against the organisation's current and desired cyber risk management posture. That risk assessment should take into account the NIST cybersecurity framework control, so identify, protect, detect, respond and recover, including all your OT systems as well. And then really lastly, an organisation should have a plan to communicate that awareness throughout the organisation to improve the cyber posture moving forwards. In essence, that's really it in a nutshell.
And I suppose, it's a silly question, but why is this important for our industry?
Yeah, certainly when we think about our lives 5 years ago, living at home, and the technology and the systems and the idea of cybersecurity has certainly grown in all facets of life. But for this specifically within the maritime and offshore industry, we think about as organisations and vessels become more and more sophisticated and interconnected, they inherently open themselves up to more risk from cyber attack. Recently, an upswing in incidents was revealed in the 2020 Maritime Cybersecurity Survey that was carried out by SAS and BIMCO, and 31% of organisations said they'd experienced a cyber incident in the 12 months prior to taking that survey in February 2020, and that was against 22% up from 2019. We've also seen a number of different threat actors and approaches that have been taken recently by attackers, from targeted attacks that are designed to paralyse and extort organisations and their vessels, to really simple, malicious intently designed just to cause as much disruption as possible without really necessarily being targeted at one business. And that, for me, is really important that organisations realise that some of these attacks are not targeted, some are just really untargeted and trying to go after as many people as they can. So an organisation really can no longer say we don't think we're a target, we don't see ourselves as a threat. It's not necessarily the name or the brand that an attacker's going after, it's the vulnerable systems that they might have on board or in the office. The badge on the front of the t-shirt is irrelevant, as an attacker might come at you in order to see what data you have and what they might be able to get hold of, rather than because of it the other way around.
And I suppose, our IMO legislation, is across all the marine industry. Do you see the yacht side at more of a risk at the moment? Nettitude, you cover a lot of the marine industry. Where does the yacht world kind of fit in their cyber awareness levels, shall we say, and their ability to deal with the cyber attacks?
Yeah, I think each part of the industry has its own challenges based upon the size, the scale, the digital footprint they have, but more importantly, the clients and the people that they work with. And I think that yachts in particular obviously attract high wealth individuals, celebrities, which could be an absolute goldmine for an attacker to either exploit or be able to view and remove the data of. Security is often paramount to these people in their daily lives, at home or in the office. But on board, you need to think, obviously, they're placing their trust in you, that they hope your systems are well managed and secure. But I think across the industry, there's this idea that the risk of compromise is limited due to the kind of water gap nature of the vessels, but that can be quite misleading. If you start to investigate the vessel's connectivity, you can often see the presence of always-on banded VSAT connections, multiple 4G networks for close-to-shore use, and bonded Ethernet connections. So there's normally always an avenue for an attacker to be able to get on board remotely.
Right.
But in terms of the threats themselves, specifically for yachts, obviously there's a lot of luxury conveniences on board as vessels utilize sort of more network technologies to provide faster, more accurate, or I guess more convenient operations for the crew and customers. I remember one recent assessment we did, we saw an air-gapped AV network that was breached by a well-intentioned firewall rule put in place to make it easier for crew to copy newly downloaded movies onto the owner's Plex media server. And then speaking of crew, obviously themselves, we're all vulnerable to phishing attacks, both targeted or untargeted. But specifically aboard yachts, obviously the crew numbers are significantly smaller. So certain staff carrying several job roles. The chief engineer or electrical technical officer, for example, might have many roles, as well as trying to run an IT system that is in essence the size of a small office, which makes it harder to maintain strong cybersecurity postures at all times.
And if you feel, obviously the IMO legislation has taken a while to get here, and part of that legislation is because of a reaction to industry. But have you, over the last couple of years, have you seen a big increase in cyber attacks? Is it becoming a kind of more of a norm for people to experience this now?
Yeah, I think there's been a shift in approach for a lot of organizations that are trying to be proactive with cybersecurity when it comes to it. For example, trying to think of more, rather than it might be us, to what do we do when it does happen and when it does hit. We come back onto the idea of the 5 NIST domains, and obviously only half of those are to deal with protecting, and the rest are all to deal with about responding and recovery and appreciating that incidents probably will happen. It's no good trying to invest all your money in protecting and stopping them. You need to be able to adequately deal with them after the fact as well. It's about having that 360 coverage. But certainly we've seen across the industry a rise in the amount of attacks, both untargeted and targeted, taking place. And quite famously, recently in the news, obviously the IMO have recently come out and said they've suffered a breach as well, which I'm sure is slightly negative publicity for the message they're trying to get across.
And we could spend all day talking about cybersecurity as a package. I suppose some of the things that may be useful for this coffee break are, some of the specific cyber threats that you've kind of experienced that maybe our viewers may be surprised about, or it would be useful for them to do. Have you got a kind of 2 or 3 that you could just explain over to us?
Well, certainly what tends to make the headlines are untargeted attacks, be ransomware or cryptolocker that manage to get on board and start paralysing things like engine propulsion systems or playing havoc with the navigational systems on board. They can pretty much cripple a ship and leave it in the water. And they might not be somebody that's specifically targeting that vessel. It's just that the system has spread and got on board, maybe through a phishing email or a crew member plugging a USB where they shouldn't. That's obviously the ones that tend to make the headlines, but also, we can see vulnerable systems like CCTV on board being compromised as that becomes smarter and more interconnected. So you can imagine if you have a particularly high-value individual enjoying his time on his yacht on board, somebody being able to hack into the CCTV systems to see exactly what they're up to would be quite embarrassing. There's lots of avenues to kind of think about, and it's important that, as a vessel or an organisation, they appreciate the different threat actors that they're likely to face.
Richard, fantastic. Thank you very much for joining us today. Obviously, the cybersecurity generally is a huge subject, and it's a very key subject, we believe, for yachts these days. Hopefully you found this talk useful. As always, our contact details are at the end of this coffee break if you want more information. And again, thank you very much for taking the time to listen.